Good evening, everyone. I had a couple of friends from other holding companies suggest some provocative questions for me to ask Martin. And what I want to say is, you have to ask the provocative questions, and I'll have a gentle conversation with my boss. But I do have the honor of engaging Sir Martin Sorrell in a conversation on trends in the communications industry. Although I don't think he needs an introduction, I will say a couple of things about Martin that might even earn me some brownie points. I think we'd all agree that Martin has had a tremendous impact on the communications industry, and he remains a hands-on leader with very close client relationships. Martin really gets the service end of our business. He is a visionary who was a very early proponent of digital and the critical role it would play in the communications industry. Martin has built an impressive digital offering through acquisitions, partnerships, and insights. His foresight and investments paid off in terms of current growth and future prospects at WPP. When it comes to creativity, Martin stresses the value of great ideas in building brands for the long term. And he has stated that creativity is the beating heart of our business, and I'm sure we couldn't agree more. Martin is also passionate and deeply committed to a wide range of charitable ventures around the world that support health, education, arts, and sustainability. But what's most interesting for us is that Martin is a man with very strong opinions, and he's not afraid to tell it like it is. So I'm sure we'll enjoy the conversation, especially when it gets to your questions.
Good. You don't get any applause for that, you see. Not at all. Zero applause. Well, I think as Paul... I was thinking, being interviewed by somebody with a name like Imperato, I mean, it really is sort of a bit... diminishing, really. Makes you feel a little bit challenged. But go on, carry on.
Okay, so before we talk about marketing trends, I thought that we would start off with a broader question on the global economy.
Right.
We have people from all over the world in the audience.
Right.
So can you give us a sense of the economic outlook for 2014 and how the global economy might impact the public relations business?
Well, I can try. I think if you ask me to sum up how I see things at the moment, I would say tough but manageable. In other words, I think everybody in the room would agree that even in the fast growth markets of the world, which are now about 31% of our business, so that's the BRICS, the next 11, as Jim O'Neill would have called it, or still does, even though he's left Goldman Sachs. So it's Asia, it's Latin America, Africa, and Middle East, and Central and Eastern Europe. Even those markets are slow growth. So although we had a very strong third quarter, we release our sales data. We say a little bit about margins and profitability, but we had a very strong third quarter. But what I said then was what we lost on the fast growth market roundabouts, we gained on the mature market swings, and I think that was the best way of putting it. So you've seen. We've just had the plenum finishing in Beijing. I think the new Chinese leadership is extremely strong, but people have been worried about a number of grey swans, one of which has been the hard, soft landing of the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, and China. One of them which has been the Eurozone, which has been Middle East, and the fourth grey swan really has been about the US economy, the debt ceiling, the shutdown, and the like. I think actually we're left with one grey swan at the moment, really, which is America. And brand America, this is a gathering of public relations and public affairs people. So this is a good audience for the administration and Congress to ask, how is brand America doing, and is it strengthening, staying the same, or weakening? And I think this is the central, economic issue at the moment. So as I look at 2013, at the back end of 2013 and 14, I think it's tough but manageable. Growth is coming from, if I look at our business, media investment management, which is what others call media planning and buying, so just to give you an idea of quantum, we're this year about $18 billion of revenue. And if I include the companies that we own 20 to 49% of, it's about 22 billion. So I like the larger number, so let's focus on the 22 billion. That was a joke. Anyway, and it's clearly a lively audience at 5:05 after a lot. Even in Bell Harbour, mind you, in a windowless room, it's not the right place to be. But if you look at the 22 billion, about 4 billion is in media investment management. About sort of 6 billion is in digital. and about 4.5 billion is what we now call data investment management, which is what we used to call consumer insight or market research. Interestingly, ever since we changed the name to data investment management, the price earnings multiple of WPP has expanded by about 200 basis points. So if anybody's got any ideas about what we can call it, we'll give us another 200 basis points. I'd like to know. But that, 3/4 of our business now is in media, data, and digital. So the nature of the company, and Paul, I did a little interview with Paul just now before Donna. This was the warm-up to Donna's questions. He asked me, what would the business look like in 5 or 10 years' time? And the honest answer is I don't really know. But you can understand the geographical bit. Myanmar occurs. Something might happen with Iran, more positive. Something might happen with Cuba. Something might even happen in the longer term with a country like North Korea. You can get that, you can understand that. It's fairly simple intellectually to follow it. The technology piece is very difficult to follow. And there are two things that are influencing our growth. One is geography and one is technology. And technology is very difficult. I'm not a technician or a scientist, or even a very good mathematician. But these are increasingly the things that are fashioning our business. And as I look at 2014, to get to the heart of your question, I see a slightly better environment. That one grey swan will be weighing down us in January and February. We'll be waiting to see how the president squares off or doesn't square off with Congress and the Tea Party and everybody else. Kicking the can down the road is not going to solve the problem. And the sad thing is that, for example, I'm on the Business Council here in America. We had a conference in Menlo Park a couple of weeks ago. We meet quarterly, and it was quite interesting that the forecast for GDP growth for next year, both real and nominal, were much less, were significantly less, about 100 basis points less, amongst that group of CEOs in the survey that Gail Fosler did, as opposed to Deutsche Bank or Goldman. So if I look at next year, worldwide GDP is forecast to grow in nominal terms at around 5.5%, 6.5%. Real growth is probably about 3.5%, 4%. So inflation is forecast to increase. And the big determinant of our business and the statistical correlation, if you look at our third quarter results, we had a slide in there that we put in for the first time, because the statistical correlation between our quarterly revenue growth as an organization and worldwide nominal GDP is amazing. It's almost a 1-to-1 correlation, almost 100% correlation, particularly in the last 4 or 5 years post-Lehman, even pre-Lehman. In the internet bust of 2000, 2001, interestingly, it diverged by quite a significant amount. And the reason is, if you think about it, all that money that was put into the internet 1.0 went into public relations, public affairs, marketing budgets, and of course it was withdrawn in the internet bust of 2001 and 2, and so we fell faster in 2001 2 as an industry, and indeed in the case of WPP, than even nominal GDP as we came under pressure. But as I go into next year, I would be slightly more optimistic, and in fact I've seen some of our budgets now, including Donna's. Not good enough, but
oh, mine was really good next year.
Maybe she'll get there, but and it's interesting, it's trending a little bit better than I thought it would be. I think we'll probably try and rein people's enthusiasm back a bit because we don't want people to be over-optimistic. But generally, I would feel better about it. We have Sochi coming up. We have the Brazilian World Cup coming up. We have the midterm congressionals. We have another American election. And don't underestimate the amounts of money that are spent. I mean, I was on a panel with Jim Messina, and he gave a figure of $4 billion around the presidential election, in the last presidential election here in the US. So even the midterms with the super PACs will tighten up the media markets. We benefit a little bit from increased political spending, but not significantly. It does tighten up the markets and make things a little bit more active. So net, I would feel better about 2014. Fast growth markets are still going to grow faster than slow growth markets. Western Europe will recover a bit, not so much France, not so much Italy, but Spain is certainly showing signs of recovery. I'm very bullish on Germany. I'm very bullish on Poland. Poland in the third quarter showed a significant flip up. Russia, strong, particularly driven by the oil price. Brazil is very challenged at the moment. Latin America is strong as a whole, but Brazil is very challenged at the moment. But we'll see faster growth in Latin America. We'll see faster growth in Africa and the Middle East. So these parts of the world that were fast growth will remain so, and Asia, of course, countries like India and China will remain so. But the general background for Western Europe and America, I think, is a little bit better, subject to that one gray swan.
So I might need a couple of
Big
acquisitions in some of those faster growing markets.
Yeah, well, yes, but you know, actually, it's an interesting point. Just remember the stats are quite interesting. So if the world is 72 trillion, America is still 16 trillion. And the next biggest economy is China at 8.5 trillion. And the next biggest economy is Japan at about 5.5. And the next biggest one is Germany, I think at around 4.5. So America is still twice as big as China. So whilst we all get excited about China, and China is our third largest market already now at $1.5 billion. So America's about 6.2, UK is about 2.8, China's about 1.5, Germany's about 1.4. Although China we get very excited about and the growth is stronger, America is still the engine. And just a couple of other points on that. So there's a wonderful report that is done by the CIA, or a division of the CIA, for the re-elected president or the new president every 4 years. And the question that's asked of this CIA department, and it's published actually, you can go and, I think you can see it online. The question is asked, what will America look like in 20 years' time? And this time round, when President Obama, after his brilliant campaign, which I think is a model to all our clients and indeed ourselves of how to do it, understanding demographics and demographic changes and using communications in an extremely effective way, the message to President Obama was that America was actually in a very strong position. Two big things: energy self-sufficiency, and then secondly, improvements in manufacturing technology, the most important of which is probably 3D manufacturing. If none of you have seen, or any of you have not seen, 3D printers at work, have a good look, because this is going to revolutionize. China is still one of the lowest cost producers in the world, manufacturing producers, but it's not the lowest cost anymore because wages have started to rise quite significantly and quite rightly. But America is in a very powerful position. And if it can sort out these political issues, I think, so the answer, Donna, is, we'll invest in the fast growth markets, but we won't forget about America. And to be fair, if the 5 big markets in Europe, UK, Germany, France, Italy, Spain, all of which are $2-3 trillion markets. So together, they're as big as America. So the Eurozone is, I think, it's 16 or 17 trillion. It's actually, some definitions, even bigger. If that engine can get going, all is not lost. There are a lot of problems to sort out, but all is not lost.
Okay, so now we'll talk a little bit about marketing trends.
Yeah.
As you well know, the public relations business is transforming along with the rest of the communications landscape.
Yeah.
And there are blurring of lines.
Not fast enough, probably.
Well, yeah, that's true, but there are blurring of lines.
If we're honest about it, yeah. Yeah, blurring of lines, sure.
Across all the marketing disciplines, and public relations business is not only doing earned media now, we're doing paid, owned, and shared. Well, many PR agencies are doing paid, owned, and shared as well. What is your take on this, and what will it mean for the public relations business?
There are two sort of contradictory forces. The first is, theoretically, and we certainly saw this a year or so ago. If you look, we're quite transparent about it. In the previous session, somebody said, you should always be in an era when you can't hide anything. You should be open about it, and we're very open about it in our reporting. For the last year or so, our public relations companies have been, probably the least successful sector of our business. Whereas if I went back a year or so ago, they were one of the most. And I think the reason for that is that the days of retainers have gone. And it's a discretionary business. The clients make discretionary decisions on PR and public affairs spending, whether we think that's right or wrong. That's what they do. And it's a project-based business. And if I look at WPP as a whole, if I look at the data investment management business, if I look at branding and identity, a Landor, a Fitch, or the Brand Union, project-based businesses have been under the gun, because if in the slow growth markets, clients have twinfold strategy: expand in the fast growth markets by capacity increase or acquisition, and in the slow growth markets, constrain capacity or reduce capacity. And maybe now there's a little bit of a trend to being worried about market share and say, we'll invest in the brand to keep it in position. But basically in the recession post-Lehman, which was a real change point, a real pain point for companies, because many companies nearly went bust. So the fear factor, the conservatism, the anti-risk attitude of companies, which I think bedevils the economy, the sort of stuff that Larry Summers is now talking increasingly about, becomes a problem. But you constrain capacity in the slow growth world. Public relations has developed, and public affairs has developed basically in the mature markets. It's still very much in its infancy in the fast growth markets. Much more fragmented, much smaller industries. It will grow, it will become more successful, but it's not regarded as being as important. In those slow growth markets, the pressure has been on cost, and therefore costs have been cut. So that's the negative. The paradox, however, is if I look at the importance of research, of what we call data investment management, if I look at the importance of social, if I look at the importance of digital and social media, in theory, public relations and public affairs should become more and more important. And I shouldn't say this to a room full of public relations and public affairs professionals, but I will say it. I think you undersell, you lack confidence in what you have to sell or market. It is much more, if you just think about this for a minute, I can't think of a CEO who we've met, and we don't, we have some relationships with CEOs, but one of the problems for the marketing function is they're not, at the consulting, at the top table as much as, say, McKinsey or Goldman Sachs, for example. But, we do get there, but not as much as I think as we should do. But if you talk to any CEO, they will say, not any, most, they will say they spend a third of their time on regulation. What's the most important function for dealing with? Public relations and public affairs. So in a world which is changing, for example, because of regulation, and social, and data, digital as a whole, should be more important as a function. And my view is very strongly that it should be fully integrated. Right? It should be fully integrated into the marketing mix. We shouldn't have these divisions. It was interesting on the last panel, particularly in relation to social. So the last couple of comments I thought were really interesting, because it started to talk about the split between financial communications, corporate communications, marketing. The issue that bedevils, I think, client companies and indeed ourselves as agencies is those silos, is those functional and geographical silos that prevent communications. They are blocks on communications. And integrating it, I think, is critically important. So if I look at the clients that we've worked with over the last 10, 15, 20 years that have been most successful, it's where the CEOs, the chairman and CEOs, have had a very strong vision, have shared that vision with a CMO who's been given the power to implement it, and that's been fully integrated.
When you say fully integrated, Martin, are you talking about horizontality across disciplines or within?
I'm talking about
client?
All of the above. Well, both, because it's no good us having one selling point if clients have multiple buying points. So the client has to change his or her organization to have, so again, without naming names, because it's invidious to do that, but you'll know who I'm talking about. When companies have been in difficulties and then CEOs, chairman and CEOs have come into those companies and they've talked about one company and pulling everything together, and then having a very strong CMO who shared that vision could articulate it and implement it effectively. And more importantly, that the chairman and CEO gave the CMO the power and budget to do it. It works very effectively. And those, in my view, are the most, the weakest are the ones that fragment it. And, you know, there's just one other thing, you know, we have a sort of a set of 10 points that we see going on in the world. And one of them we've been writing about for years is this tendency for companies to centralize more and for power inside companies to be more centralized. But at the same time, we're also seeing that it's becoming more localized. So the integrators we have in WPP are client integrators. So we have 40 client leaders for 40 of our largest clients, which covers about, of the 18 billion, it's about $7 billion of revenue, about 35,000 people. And those are the client integrators. So those are the people across WPP who integrate Ford Motor Company, Team Detroit. That's one. The second is at a country level. So we've just appointed a country manager for Israel, which is now our 14th geography. We operate in 110 countries. We've got some regions in there, so it's more than 14 countries. There are about 20 of the countries out of the 110 countries. We now have a local country manager with no power, with no authority over the verticals in our organization, but with the responsibility of three things. One is to make sure we've got the best people running our businesses. Two is to make sure if we're doing acquisitions that we know who the good companies are locally. And thirdly, and probably most important, well, as important as the people point, is identifying the companies in each country that we should be working with, that will be the multinationals of the regional companies of the future. Because anybody sitting in corporate HQ can't know, in our case, what's going on in 110 different countries. It's hopeless. You might know 3 or 4 if you're lucky, or have a decent knowledge, but you can't replace the knowledge at local. So we're getting this focus at the center on the billion-dollar brands. You know, we have $7 billion brands in WPP. Interesting. We have 7 companies with more than $1 billion of revenue. Depends how you define them. So, you know, we're building our own billion-dollar brands. You have that, and then you have it, the local, because we're growing, you know, 110 countries. I think Coca-Cola is in, I remember Muhtar Kent saying, I think something more than 200 countries. I didn't think there were more than 200 countries, but there are apparently. So when you have that sort of diversity, you have to have local focus as well. And what's really interesting is in the last 3 or 4 weeks, 2 clients have said to me, we're going to slim down the center, have a much more focused center. We're going to have 20 business units, this is one case, functional and geographic. In the other case, it was a division of a bigger company, slimmed down center and 15 business units. And the squeeze is going to be on regional. So regional structures, and the reason for that, I think is quite interesting too, is that technology enables much bigger organizational spans today. So if McKinsey came to you 15, 20 years ago, they would say, you can't have more than 13 or 14 people reporting to you. Now, because of the improvements in technology, you probably can have a wider span. And I think you'll see that organizations become faster, more nimble, more networked as a result of that structural change.
You mentioned big data before.
Yeah.
And data has never been something that was really core to the public relations business in the past. But big data is changing the way our clients are doing their business. It's helping them target customers and new customers existing and you know, get quick results and things like that. How important do you think big data is for the public relations business?
Well, I mentioned Obama's, you know, and the president, whether it's David Axelrod, David Plouffe, Dan Wagner, Jim Messina, whoever it is, you know, because success has many fathers, and there are large numbers of people who've either been involved or claim to have been involved in that campaign, including our own Blue State Digital. But if you look at that campaign, if you want any proof or any justification for focusing on, and big data is probably the wrong word for it, but a detailed understanding of what's going on, look at that campaign. And of course, CEOs, and I was at the JP Morgan conference in Europe. We did a panel with Messina, and the CEOs were mesmerized. Or actually at the Menlo Park Business Council, Dan Wagner. I mean, I have never seen a group of CEOs so mesmerized by what he was saying in relation to his description of how they had used data and the analysis of data in that campaign. I mean, they were absolutely, you could hear a pin drop in the audience. Quite extraordinary. Never seen it before. And they were absolutely entranced by it. But just look at that campaign. Just look at whatever you think of the president, whatever you think about the predicament at the moment, brilliant campaigning, brilliant understanding of the demographic changes in America. Hispanics, Afro-Americans, Asian Americans. What Sol Trujillo, who's a Mexican by birth, if I remember rightly, sits on our board, used to be at Telstra, an Orange, calls the new mainstream. Understanding that in the age group, I think it's 0 to 16, there are more new mainstream youngsters than there are traditional Americans. And the president understood that, or his people understood that. Single women, gays, understood the change that had taken place. The Republicans just didn't understand it. And they understood the importance of data. You remember, was it Orca, was the name of the Republican software system, broke down on election day. And I can remember somebody saying to me that they got an email from Obama campaign headquarters saying, we know you voted, this is about, I think, 11 o'clock on election day. We know you voted, you have a sister in Ohio, which was a key constituency. We know she hasn't voted, could you call her and tell her to vote? So if you want, the sort of justification behind Donna's question about the importance of data, just look at that. Now, our clients receive data from multiple sources, including ourselves. When we talk about big data at WPP, which is 4.5 billion out of that 18 or 22 billion that I mentioned in terms of our revenues, when we look at that, what we're saying is take our data, take the competitive sources of data, put it together on one dashboard in real time that you can use in a meaningful way. That's what we understand big data to be, certainly in the initial stages. Because what happens, I come back to the silos, all our clients are siloed, functionally and geographically, as we are. And people fail to compare and contrast. And that's what has to be done. Because if you think about the investment that's being made by clients in this area, it's colossal. The issue is how do you leverage it? The other thing that, coming back to Washington and the Snowden NSA situation and the occurrences. I mean, the thing that worries me about that, and I'm meant to be somebody who's a little bit aware of what's going on, and I was surprised by Snowden and the revelations, and despite the fact that people say that governments spy on one another, I'm surprised by the fact that possibly Angela Merkel's phone was bugged either while she was, before she was Chancellor, or even maybe when she was Chancellor. I mean, for the president to have to call her and say, we're not bugging you now, right? And leaving open the question about, whether she was bugged before. And I likened it to Maurice Levy ringing me up and saying, look, I want to make it clear we're not bugging your phone, but we may have bugged it before. I mean, that's, I think, quite incredible. Now, whilst at one level, that's you might say that's political, I think that has a big impact on consumers. And the other thing we have to watch out for, I mean, the privacy issue is a deep and difficult issue, is that these happenings, we may think they're distant, but these happenings have, I think, commercial repercussions of quite a serious nature. And when I went to, with the Interactive Advertising Bureau with Randy Rothenberg and his group, we went to see Neelie Kroes at the European Commission 5-6 years ago to talk about opt-out, to make sure that the legislation in Europe enabled us to get consumers to opt out. That's gone. The only basis on which we can go forward is opt-in. And the opt-ins have to be, for consumers, will have to be very clear, transparent, and not these 19, 20-page documents you get, when you log on to a website and people say accept or deny, and, it would take a lawyer about, 2 weeks to go through the agreement and get some meaningful form out of it. So I think this area of data, which is incredibly important, is going to become incredibly more sophisticated, turn our business into a science as well as an art, madmen and mathsmen, art and science, craft and science, and it doesn't mean that the big idea is going to disappear. Of course the big idea is central and very important, but it means that other things are going to be probably equally important. So the businesses will change. And so the privacy issue is going to become more important.
So you think privacy may limit us in the future and the ability to get the
data? I worry about that. Mm-hmm. Because, the other thing, of course, is that clients are very nervous on the privacy thing. So when we start to do big data stuff and we put proposals together, the legal function gets very exercised. And the legal function basically says, this is probably the legal function bedevils, I would argue, public relations and public affairs too, because when you have to immediately respond in a crisis, often you get paralysis inside companies because legal says you can't do that, you can't say that. And when somebody said in the previous session about, you have to be genuine and you mustn't be contrived, it's very difficult to be genuine and not to be contrived or appear contrived when a lawyer is drafting a statement for you. It's impossible. And what the consumers want is somebody saying, not speaking with forked tongue, but speaking with truth, not hedging things around with political words or verbiage, but just saying how they feel. So I really do worry about that, Donna, yeah.
So although the public relations agencies have done better this year at Cannes, why do you think we're not doing as well as we should at this award?
Well, I think it's a technique. I think and the people who've got the best technique are the people who've been at it for longest. And the advertising agencies, whether you like it, whether we like it or not, they have, so I do find it quite extraordinary when the public relations segment in Cannes is won by advertising agencies. Oh, by the way, the other thing that happens is the advertising agencies put in for the awards, and often the media agencies or the PR agencies or the design agencies who have been an integral part of what that award represents don't put it in. So it's history. It'll change. As Cannes becomes, we're trying to encourage Cannes, for example, to include, you may find this loathsome, but to include data. Visualization of data is a very interesting, you may think this is crazy, very interesting creative area. How you present data in a meaningful way to consumers that they will understand, comprehend,
well, the Obama campaign is a good example of that.
Very good example, yeah. So we're trying to broaden it, but I think it's only a question of time, Donna. I do think it's, there are a lot of our own companies, and I know competitors' companies, PR companies, who bemoan the fact that they didn't get the credit, even though they contributed to one of the campaigns that won an award. And the reason is, if you don't speak, you don't get heard. So, and it's not an inexpensive activity either. Putting in, Terry Savage runs a very good business at Cannes. Very good business. In fact, it's a much bigger and better business than it was when the previous owner had it.
So just one more question before we open up to the audience. I wanted to ask on a topic that's been in the press a lot, and I know you have an opinion on, and remind you that I have lots of friends from Omnicom and Publicis in the audience.
You probably won't have them many more after.
What do you think will be the effect of the Publicis Omnicom?
Well, I said, it's strategically puzzling, it's structurally clunky, there are regulatory issues, there are no benefits that have been articulated for and I mean no benefits that have been articulated for clients, or indeed for the people in the organisation. But apart from that, did you enjoy the play, Mrs. Lincoln? No, listen, it's often, we often get asked that question, and the question of why did they do it? And I think if you really look at it, and I think if we had the two protagonists here in a fit of transparency and honesty, yeah, Publicis it was a great deal for, because if you look at the numbers, there's no way that Publicis was worth the same as Omnicom. And when John Wren, actually, I think with great insight, said, when asked, why did you do it on July the 26th, when they announced it, he said, the stars were aligned. That was actually a very prophetic phase, because what actually happened at that point in time is the two market caps were in sync. They were 50-50. So the stars did align, and Maurice got parity for a company that was demonstrably only worth 40%, or maybe 45% of the total. And I think that was a great deal for him. For Wren, if you look at the TSRs, the total shareholder returns, for ourselves against Omnicom or against Publicis, for the last 1, 5, 10 years on Bloomberg, you use their app, go and run the comparisons there. You will be staggered by what you see. And basically, Omnicom, from a TSR point of view, for the last 10 years has trod water. Just done better than maybe about the same as the S&P. So I think they did it for defensive reasons. And that's the reason I think they came together. I don't think strategically it made much sense, because the two companies were going in opposite directions. Structurally, it's co-CEOs, co-chairman, we'll be co-CEOs for 2.5 years, and after 2.5 years, you'll be chairman and I'll be CEO, and then after another 2.5 years, you retire, I'll become chairman and I'll pick my CEO. I mean, whether this gets through the corporate governance, on a serious note, if this gets through the corporate governance hurdles, it will be a miracle. If ISS agrees to that as being the corporate structure, it sets a precedent, I think, which is quite extraordinary. So, for all those reasons, I think it was more defensive, actually, in many respects. From a PR point of view, it's very interesting, because one company, Omnicom, has a much stronger, I think, public relations offering, and I don't want to upset anybody in the room, but I think it's true.
Well, they have more.
Well, no, more and better, I think, just as an observer, right? And I think we would say that if we were having our quarterly meetings, Donna, we would
Where's
say,
Andy?
If I asked you, who's the good competition, you would certainly agree with what I just said. So the big battleground here, is going to be who controls what. Now, on digital, Publicis are saying we're the best digital operation, and Omnicom are saying, no, it's got to be run out of New York, not Paris. On PR, you would argue, if I was them, it should be run out of New York or the US, because that's where the strength and the combined PR operations are. And I always thought it was funny, actually, being very, very naughty here. When who's the head of PR at Publicis? What's his name? The French guy. Yeah, Olivier, right. When he sent a note saying, I welcome my sisters and brothers, I could almost feel the tsunami rippling through Omnicom's public relations unit. So the fact that Olivier would suggest that they were on parity. So, but we all know that. We all think we're better than we are, or some of us do, some of us don't. And it's always a problem. But I think it's a real issue. From our point of view, and indeed from our competitors' point of view who are not part of POG, it's a big opportunity. There's already a lot of movement people-wise, a lot. And a lot of movement client-wise, a lot. And I don't mean the clients are going to come out and say, there's a conflict here, we're going to do something about it, but it's going to be much more subtle than that. So.
Any plans to buy IPG?
Cheeky devil, I've got to go.
I had to ask one.
The answer is, if you look at valuations, and in fact, go back to that Bloomberg app and look at what's remarkable is the value attributed to Havas and IPG. In fact, in total shareholder return, for the last 5 years, IPG has done better than Omnicom. It's amazing. Maybe Harris and others would say it's not amazing, but I mean, so valuations, I think, have got ahead of them. So the answer to your question, the question would be a no, because the valuation, I think, is out of sight. But you know, if in 5 years' time it was different, who knows?
Okay, so I think we have time for a couple of questions. Yes?
Thank you very much. Sir Martin, my name is Yomi, and I'm the Secretary General of the African Public Relations Association. I also run the Boss Marcella affiliate in Lagos, Nigeria. My question to you is, what are your plans for Africa, WPP plans for Africa, and what you've actually mentioned that you think Africa is one of the growth areas. What will fuel that growth? And so what are we to expect? Thank you.
Well, as you may or may not know, we've, as of November the 14th, I think it is, the shareholders of Scan Group will approve us going to control of Scan Group. Scan Group is based in Nairobi in Kenya, and has a very strong position, dominant position, I would say, in East Africa and increasingly in West Africa. And of course we have a very big business in South Africa. So our business in South Africa is now over $500 million. And there's another $350 million in Sub-Saharan and Northern Africa and Francophone. So you put the lot together, it's about 850 million and growing very rapidly. And you can see that from the results of Scan Group itself. Our clients tend to be concentrated in packaged goods and telecommunications, which is where we see very big and significant growth. Obviously, the opportunities there are natural resource opportunities in energy and minerals, but I think the African, we ran a campaign at Davos about 5, 6, 7 years ago, which talked about Africa being the continent of opportunity and not the continent of pestilence and disease and war. And I don't think that campaign, or indeed any other similar campaign, had tremendous impact. But what has had tremendous impact is the growing importance of agriculture, of resources, of food supplies, all of which have made agricultural economies and mineral and resource economies much more important on a worldwide stage. So Africa naturally has become more and more important. And I think from an event point of view, just like the Brazilian World Cup, I mean, despite the challenges they face on infrastructure and inequality, and Rio, the Olympics in 2016, the World Cup in Brazil in 2014, just as that will change the attitude of the world, I think, to Latin America, make that the decade of Latin America, I certainly hope it will be. I think the World Cup actually in South Africa had a similar impact on how people viewed not only South Africa, but Africa, in the same way that Beijing changed the attitude to China and Asia generally, but China in particular, and how even London, after a very successful London Olympics in 2012, it changed the attitude about how the British could organise an event, because up until that point in time, it was thought that we couldn't do that. And do it, on a different level of budget to, say, Danny Boyle did a fantastic job with the opening and closing ceremonies. So I think Africa is full of hidden promise, but that hidden promise is actually becoming less hidden. So it's very much on our agenda. Competitively, I don't want to stimulate competition by getting everybody in this room to focus on Africa, but here goes. I mean, we spent a lot of time and a lot of effort. We've made this year alone, several acquisitions in South Africa and elsewhere in Africa, and the most important one of which has been the Scan Group. I would say it's not the downside. The difficulties is that Africa, as you know better than I, is very fragmented. You're talking about a large number of different countries with great scale. I mean, one of our clients, you're from Nigeria, describes Nigeria as the China of Africa, and I think that's exactly right. So if you look at the scale of the opportunity, but as you also know, these are not the easiest markets for a whole host of reasons to operate in. By the way, it doesn't mean that Western markets or mature markets aren't difficult for the same reasons. I mean, I'm not, people in glass houses should not throw stones. But you know as well as I do, they're not easy markets to operate in, but becoming more and more important. And the longer our competition ignores it, the better it will be.
Laura?
Laura Sean from Weber Shandwick. You offer one piece of advice for us. You said we lack confidence. What are the other typical mistakes that you see PR people making, and how would you critique the PR industry?
I think that's a bit unfair, actually. I mean, I just think, I think there was one journalist who sort of said, question about, if you look at WPP, and PR is 10% of our business. It's not a third, it's not 45, it's not 50, it's not 60, it's 10% of our business. But it's a smaller, but very important part of our business. I think we should be more, and I put myself in the, with you on this, we should be more confident about it for the reasons I've said. Firstly, the rise of social media, which after all is 20% of all spending now by our clients is on social media. 1/3 of consumers' time is spent on the internet and mobile. So, just taking the opposite for a minute, we also invest 20% of our budgets on magazines and newspapers, the old legacy variety, felling trees and distributing newsprint. And we know that consumers only spend 10% of their time on newspapers and magazines. So those two things have to change. The rest of it is probably the right distribution, at least at the moment. So social, not social, just search, display, video, social, mobile, those 5 legs of Google as we describe them, are going to become more and more important. And I would say in 5 years' time, in WPP's business, we want it to be 40 to 45% of our business instead of the 35 it is now. So it's already twice the weight that our clients are investing, right? But we want it to be more. So PR should be even more confident, because that's going to have an even greater impact on our business, on our public relations and public affairs business. Because regulation is also, as I said, most CEOs that we come into contact with spend a phenomenal amount of time on regulation with their corporate counsels, with their CFOs and everybody else inside the companies. So I think that's another area. Data, for all the reasons we've discussed in this last hour or so, becoming more and more important. So I think digital as a whole is driving it. So I think we should be more confident about it and not apologetic. And what will happen in the integrated campaigns increasingly is that public relations will have a louder voice. I mean, the more integrated it becomes, they will have a louder voice and a greater say, I think, as it gets more and more integrated. So, lady there.
Go.
I'm Yvonne from the Netherlands, Lewis PR. We're an independent firm. You were saying that PR isn't transitioning fast enough, and that we should, change and do things differently. Yeah. And particularly on the digital side. But where do you see social media sit? Is it within PR, or should it sit within the advertising? You can't. It infuses everywhere. And I mean, if you get involved in saying, it should sit in advertising or branding and identity or media or whatever. I mean, the biggest argument probably that goes on is between, it's like the scene from Mad Men, where the media director comes into the boardroom where they're having a meeting and says, I'm upset because I'm not on the board and I don't have a shareholding, right? Which reminded me of, and that was a really good vignette in Mad Men of the way life was, where the media people. So this is the argument about whether the medium drives the message or the message drives the medium. In the old days, the creative would then, you do the creative, you do the planning, you do the creative execution, and then you would select the media. The issue now maybe is the media has become so fragmented that the creative will vary depending on which medium you use. So it's a sort of a reversal. I don't know, but I mean, that's where the biggest struggle, I think, goes. And what you've seen, whether it be
POG, whether it be, or in its the two parts of POG, whether you're talking about IPG or, Dentsu Aegis is a media-driven company. I mean, that's basically all media, right? The Japanese model of advertising agencies was a company that was owned by the media. Until Dentsu went public, still is owned by the newspapers and the Asahi Shimbun, or whoever it is in Japan that owns. But they had the controlling shareholding until they went public. They were a creation of the media. So in a way, some people in the West are saying that the Japanese model is the right one, certainly in terms of control. So, but I don't think you want to get caught up on that. You know, the more integrated it becomes, the more the public relations voice will be stronger at that table. And, you know, if I look at our 40 agency heads, a more than a disproportionate proportion would come from the public relations and public affairs. And I mean, I think that's the key thing. So I don't think you can say social should sit here. It's a bit like that conversation I heard the back end of in the previous session, which said, you know, talked about the various silos, whereas, again, I come back, the most effective corporate organizations that I've seen, and maybe my view is colored a bit, to be honest. Maybe we like it because it's easier to deal with. Maybe that's, you know, in total transparency, that's probably part of it too. But it's also true that those companies that are focused on being one company, and it's easier when you have a uni-branded company rather than a multi-branded company like that, but where you say one company, and we're going to speak with one voice and one vision, those are the powerful companies. You know, those people that simplify, that don't complicate. Those people have a clear message and a clear vision. And then you give her the power to the CMO to implement it. And by the way, you know, it's difficult in America because I think the average life of a CMO at the moment is about 2 years. Average life as CEO is about 5 worldwide, I think, maybe 4. Average life as CMO, so CMOs are rotating. Anyway, I'm going to be dragged off the.
Two questions left. Wait.
Yeah, first of all, thanks for coming. Matt Makovsky from Makovsky. We're independent, so kind of marrying.
We're all independent by nature.
Yeah. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So marrying actually all of the questions that we've heard, you mentioned earlier, which I found fascinating, that you know, WPP's growth kind of tracks 1-to-1.
Yes.
With global GDP.
It is an amazing correlation, actually.
And so knowing you to be the business innovator and competitor that you are, is that good enough? And do you?
No, it's never enough.
Right.
You'd have to have
I could
twice. It's
answer
a very, very good question. Is it good enough? Is that the question?
And it's a two-part question.
Yeah.
So is that good enough? And then if it's not, in order to beat it, what is the one area where you think you need to focus most? So we've heard invest in emerging markets. We've heard invest in mobile, social, digital, emerging technologies.
Okay.
Where would you pinpoint?
Okay, so let me just deal with the second first. I mean, our strategy is, which I haven't gone into, is fast growth markets, which are 30, 31. We want to be 40 to 45. They naturally, because they grow faster, even in current circumstances, increase by 1% a year. So if they're 31 now, in 5 years, they'll be 36. And then if we acquire, they'll go up. So we'll get into the 40 to 45 zone, I think, in 5 years' time. Digital is 35, also grows 1% a year if we make acquisitions, same. So those two things. So fast growth markets, digital, and of course digital affects slow growth markets too. So you get that feedback there. Third area is data. So that's 25% of our business. It's probably the right, with digital being more than half of our business, you know, together, digital plus data, it's probably about right. And the last thing is integration. So investing in those integrated teams, both at a client level and at a country level, because you've got to maintain that balance. As to, is it good enough? I mean, you know, in relation, you know, everybody is sort of sitting there and saying, what's WPP going to do in response? You know, we've been number one, and we started from 0 28 years ago, literally 0, nothing. 2 people in a room. And we went to number one, we went to number two, we went to number one, we went to number two, number one will be number two again. So we've been in this position before, but everybody's looking and saying, what are you going to do next? I think the answer to your question is, it's not about being bigger. I mean, you will become bigger if you do something, obviously. But it's not about being bigger per se. That's where I think POG's got it wrong, actually. Because the one area where you get economies of scale is media buying. And interestingly, the American market, where they will have the most scale, is the one market where scale actually doesn't work, because the discounts attached to the clients rather than to the pool, which is very different in other markets. And they have to get their 4.5 agencies together, okay? But I think the real issue, that I think your question is really interesting, because what we have to demonstrate is that we're smarter. That it's not about scale for scale's sake, but it's about intelligence. And if you think about that 3/4 of our business, which is not in the Don Draper stuff, but it's in the media, it's in the digital and the data, that's where we've got to focus. And we've got to do two things. One is we've got to have greater depth and knowledge and dominance, and we've got to integrate it. Because if you just think about it logically for a minute, clients are investing $4.5 billion a year with us in data. Now, there are some restrictions on what we can do because of confidentiality, etc. But we don't use that for the $4 billion that sits in media planning and buying, what we call media investment management. If you confuse that, but it's one thing is not known, is we are the non-US Nielsen. We do television audience measurement in 30, 40 countries. We do it actually in Brazil, Russia, India, China. So if you confuse that knowledge with what we know about media planning and buying, with what we know about digital, that's powerful stuff. And that's where I think, so the answer to your question is we have got to be smarter. And that doesn't mean just about leveraging what we've got inside currently, but by finding other assets. So, next week we're going to do something in the US, not big, but we'll do something you'll see announced in the US, which is very smart, I think. Very smart in the digital area. Smart for two reasons. One, because it gives us greater knowledge and greater, not much more scale, it's small, but also because it enables us to consolidate client businesses in a which the agency we're acquiring and our existing businesses have, in a much more intelligent way.
Okay, we have a question over here.
Hi, Craig Bida from Cohn Communications. Thank you for your comments. CSR, corporate social responsibility, becoming increasingly a consumer expectation. It's part of mainstream business strategy.
Absolutely.
How do you think about that as you talk to your C-suite partners?
Absolutely.
And then how do you think about building talent across your network?
Okay, so really good point. And it's embarrassing that it hasn't come up and that I haven't talked about it, because it is another area that the public relations industry should feel more confident about. So in those that set of 10 points that we have about how the industry, which is about globalization, retail, importance of internal communications, global and local structures, and everything, one of the things is corporate social responsibility. And there is absolutely, it is crystal clear that every CEO, every company that we talk to is not greenwashing anymore. And if we were talking about this 10 years ago, we would have said there was a bit of greenwashing going on. Now it is front and center at the heart of everything we do and everything our clients do. So I think we're running currently about 3 or 4 major corporate campaigns, the central element of which, I don't like the phrase corporate social responsibility, but has a CSR or CR content to it, or social content to it, because clients understand, and we understand on their behalf, that making sure that we involve all stakeholders is critically important. And the man actually who understood this best of all, I think, was John Brown. He used to be the CEO of BP, who in 1997 at Stanford Business School did a speech, actually, which I think was a seminal speech, where what he said was, and he just used one hyphenated word, long term. He said, if you're in business for the long term, you will do good. Doing good is good. I mean, it's simple. It's very simple. Doing good is good business, period. And the only qualifier I would put on it is if you're in business for the long term. If you're in the oil business and in for the short term, and you want to rip out the oil, or the shale gas as quickly as you can at the lowest possible cost in the quickest point in time, I'd agree it's different. But if you're in business, as we are at WPP, for the long term, and building our brands over the long term, and JWD, for example, will be 150 years old next year, and despite all my efforts to destroy it, I failed to do so, so far. Anyway, it is front and center the part I've said. Doing good is good business if you're in business for the long term. It's as simple as that. And so for PR people and for public affairs people, massive opportunity. What do? Well, we produce and have done for now, I think it's 14 or 15 years, a corporate social responsibility report which outlines what our clients are doing, what we do with our clients in the area, in that all-embracing area, and what we do ourselves. Tim Shriver's on our board. He runs chairman of Special Olympics. So, heavily involved with that as a good example, but, a number of clients are like Coca-Cola or Bank of America, or whatever it happens to be, and everybody gets involved in that too. But it's front and center part of it, and it's incredible the amount of work that we are doing in those areas, particularly corporate work in those areas.
Martin, sorry.
If
it was up to me, and I suspect 99% of the rest of the room,
I thought it was just you, actually.
Continue for a while.
I wasn't
but
interrupted.
One of your colleagues at the back of the room is sort of reminding me that you have a flight to catch at 7 o'clock, and I would hate to be responsible
Don't
for
worry.
making you
Okay,
late.
fine. Good.
I was letting him still talk.
I know, I know. So if I could just say, while we're obviously all very disappointed that you couldn't think of anything controversial to say about Omnicom or Publicis,
Well, I thought, art of English understatement.
we are extremely grateful for you taking an hour to share your thoughts with us. We really appreciate it. It was a great way to end a great day.
And it has not been career-threatening to Donna.
Not yet. Thank you very much, Saman.
Thank you.